The day my divorce was finalized, my husband Marcus walked out of the courthouse with the kind of smile reserved for men who believe they have just conquered something. And in every legal sense, he had. He took the house, the colonial style, home in the quiet suburb that we had chosen together on a rainy Saturday afternoon, walking through empty rooms and imagining our future in every corner. He took both cars, including the one I had driven for 7 years, its backseat still holding a forgotten hospital badge lanyard, and it contained just enough struggle to be inspiring. What it never mentioned was me. It never mentioned that during the first 3 years, when Marcus had almost no clients and the consulting firm existed mostly as a registered business name and an optimistic website, I had been working double shifts as a critical care nurse to keep us financially alive. I had been paying rent, paying utilities, covering groceries, covering the cost of Marcus's business registration fees and his software subscriptions and his professional memberships, while also coming home exhausted at 11 at night to sit beside him while he revised pitch decks and asked me whether his value proposition sounded convincing. It never mentioned the contracts, the ones I had quietly reviewed before he submitted them, because Marcus had a particular blind spot for the fine print, for the liability clauses that looked harmless and weren't, for the payment terms that seemed standard until a client used them to delay invoices by 6 months. Twice, I had caught provisions in proposed contracts that would have bound Marcus's firm to deliverables that were either impossible or financially catastrophic. He had been frustrated when I slowed him down. He had called me overly cautious. Later, when the same patterns showed up in deals that his competitors had signed and subsequently struggled with, he had never quite found a way to return to those conversations. It never mentioned the financial architecture I had quietly built behind the scenes. Marcus was brilliant at the front-facing work, the presentations, the client relationships, the confident articulation of strategy. But he had no patience for financial modeling, for risk assessment, for the kind of detailed projection work that allowed a growing company to make decisions based on something more reliable than instinct and optimism. I had taught myself the software. I had built the models. I had maintained them through years of company growth, updating assumptions, flagging emerging risks, creating documentation that translated complex financial patterns into language Marcus could use confidently in boardrooms. He had always believed he understood the business because I had always made sure the business was understandable to him. That was the thing he had never valued. That was the thing he had never quite seen, and that was the thing he had walked away from the courthouse without, despite taking everything else. My new apartment was small in a way that felt almost deliberate. The walls were thin enough that I could occasionally hear the faint rhythm of my neighbor's evening television. The kitchen required a certain choreography to navigate efficiently. The bedroom window looked directly into the brick wall of the adjacent building. I loved it with an intensity that surprised me. For the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, the silence belonged entirely to me. There was no one else's anxiety filling the room. No ambient tension from a partner who was either euphoric about a potential deal or spiraling quietly about a setback and needed me to recalibrate both states without being asked. The quiet was simply quiet. It was mine to inhabit. I returned to full-time hospital work within a week, picking up extra shifts because the long hours were grounding and because the work itself had always given me a clarity that nothing else quite matched. There is something clarifying about work that deals in immediate, concrete stakes. I found myself settling back into the rhythms of the ward with something that felt almost like relief. 3 days after I moved in, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I recognized but hadn't expected. Carla, I know this is probably not appropriate and please tell me if I'm overstepping, but I wanted to check in and ask how you're doing. Carla Singh had been Marcus's director of operations for 4 years. She was efficient, serious, and had always maintained a politely professional distance from me in the way that some employees do when they are uncertain about the appropriate relationship with a principal spouse. Her reaching out felt unusual enough that I read the message twice. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. I wrote back. That's kind of you. Her reply came quickly. I'm glad to hear it. I'm asking partly because things here have felt unsettled lately. Marcus announced a major restructuring last week. Several department heads were caught off guard. He says he's streamlining, but I think people are confused about what that actually means operationally. I set the phone down and looked at the wall for a moment. I picked it up again. I'm sure he has a plan. I typed. He usually does. I sent it and didn't hear back from her that evening. But something about the exchange settled into the back of my mind and stayed there. I unpacked boxes. I organized my modest kitchen. I hung the 3 pieces of art I had kept, the ones Marcus hadn't wanted because they were small and unimpressive. And I kept thinking about what Carla had not quite said. Marcus had never managed operations alone. He had managed the appearance of managing operations alone, which is a different skill set entirely and one that depends heavily on having competent, deeply informed people around you filling the gaps you don't acknowledge. That evening, rearranging a bookshelf, I found the flash drive. It had been stored inside a hollowed-out notebook. The kind of thing you do when you are saving something without consciously deciding to save it. A small gray drive, no larger than my thumb, containing 7 years of financial models, risk assessment frameworks, contract review protocols, and the internal forecasting documentation I had built and maintained across multiple phases of Hardwell Consulting's growth. I held it in my palm for a long time. The memories attached to it were not dramatic. They were mundane in the specific way of real sacrifice. They were Tuesday nights after 12-hour shifts. They were Saturday mornings traded for spreadsheets. They were skills I had acquired through patient self-teaching because the work needed to be done and no one else was going to do it. I placed the drive on my small table and left it there. The weeks that followed brought news in pieces. Carla texted occasionally with updates that grew progressively more concerned in tone. Delayed financial reviews. A sudden reorganization of the contract's approval process that bypassed the team that had historically caught compliance issues. Growing frustration among senior staff who were being excluded from decisions they had previously been central to. Then, one evening, she called. He dissolved the financial review division, she said. She sounded like someone trying to remain professional while standing in a building they believed might be structurally compromised. The entire team. He said they were creating unnecessary friction in the approval pipeline. I absorbed this. When did that happen? 10 days ago. And last week he personally approved a major expansion contract with a development group in Southeast Asia. It's a significant deal. The numbers people are seeing don't seem to account for the currency exposure, the regulatory compliance requirements in that jurisdiction, or the phased delivery liabilities. But when the remaining team raised questions, he told them they were being too conservative. I thanked her for telling me. I ended the call and stood in my kitchen for a long moment. I recognized the pattern exactly. I had seen it in Marcus's early years, before the systems I had built gave him a reliable structure to operate within. The confident dismissal of caution as timidity. The preference for deals that looked impressive over deals that were sound. The fundamental inability to distinguish between boldness and recklessness without someone beside him who understood the difference and could make him slow down long enough to see it. I had been that person for 18 years. I had never fully understood until now how much of his success had depended on it. I made a deliberate choice not to intervene. It was not my company. It was not my responsibility. The version of my life that included Hardwell Consulting Group had been legally and formally concluded. I had a career, a small apartment, and the beginning of a life that belonged entirely to myself. I returned to my shifts. I slept better than I had in years. Marcus's email arrived on a Thursday morning. It was brief and carefully formal. The kind of message someone writes when they need something and have not yet decided how much to reveal about how badly they need it. There are some legacy financial files I need to locate for an urgent internal audit. I believe you may have retained personal copies. It would be worth a conversation. Please call me. I read it once. I read it again. I deleted it. Whatever he needed, whatever was unraveling, he had made the choices that led to it. He had fired the team I had always considered the institutional memory of his financial operations. He had approved a high-risk international deal without the framework that had historically protected him from exactly this kind of exposure. He had built a company on a foundation he had never acknowledged and then stripped away the people who maintained it. 2 days later, the business news covered it. Significant losses connected to the overseas expansion project. Investor confidence declining. Multiple senior figures questioning the leadership decisions that had led to the exposure. The language in the coverage was careful and corporate, but the outline of what had happened was legible to anyone who knew the internal context. My phone was busy that evening with messages from people I hadn't heard from in months. I was reading through them quietly when my doorbell rang. He looked. had come for a routine appointment and I was finishing a morning shift. We recognized each other in the way you recognize people who once occupied the center of your life, fully and immediately and with a strange, layered feeling that doesn't have a clean name. He stopped. I misjudged things, he said. I misjudged a lot. I considered this for a moment. You didn't misjudge me, Marcus, I said. You saw me clearly and chose to ignore what you saw, because acknowledging it would have complicated the story you wanted to tell about yourself. He nodded slowly. He seemed to be trying to find something to add. I didn't wait for it. I walked down the corridor and didn't look back. Steady in the way that people become steady when they have finally stopped carrying weight that was never truly theirs to carry. Outside the hospital, the morning was clear and cool. I had 2 suitcases and a small apartment and a career that had always been mine alone. I had everything I needed. There is a particular kind of invisibility that falls on the people who hold things together quietly. They are not the ones taking the credit, so they are not the ones people notice. They are the structural elements, the ones whose presence is only fully understood when it's gone. Marcus had spent 18 years standing in front of the work I did and calling it his own story. He had believed it so completely that he hadn't understood, until the architecture failed, what he had actually been standing on. Sometimes it takes losing everything to reveal who was truly holding it together. And sometimes the person who was holding it together is exactly the person everyone expected to be devastated, who is instead quietly, finally free.